the cast on Scandal was so great, but they also were funny because, they didn't find out the storylines until the table read. So if I was writing the next episode, sometimes I would have to hide because they wanted to know what was going to happen.
Right.
So there were times where I had to write some scenes occasionally, and I'd be like, let me go to, some side room somewhere.
That's awesome.
I'll tell the AD where I am in case someone's looking for me. But yeah, so I was kind of trained to write, anywhere. There was one time I had to write a scene in Shonda's office actually, because, she wanted it pretty quickly. And she's like, oh, you could just, and to her, she's like, oh, just like sit here and write it. And I was like, whoa.
And you're like, I am not hitting the keys fast enough. She's going to be like, she can't type. That's like 10 words a minute.
I know. And I was like, oh my God, this is so stressful. But, so yeah, I went through those growing pains.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is a podcast on directing for anybody that's quite simply ever watched anything. Pete converses with a wide range of fellow directors, writers, actors, showrunners, producers, executives, and more on a journey to determine just what makes a good director and why we'll always need stories. The Director is Pete Chatmon's digital studio, built on the pillars of craftsmanship that ensure a unique vision. I'm talking about story, innovation, perspective. Learn more about The Director, and better yet, get your official Director's Chair wear by visiting www.drctr.video. That's drctr.video.
All right, what's up, people? This is Pete Chatmon welcoming you to episode 18 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. And our esteemed guest for this episode is the writer and producer RAAMLA MOHAMED. RAAMLA got her start in the Shondaland world. She came out of came out of New York via LA. People bounce around between the coasts. And she made her way into the Disney ABC writing program and landed in that Shondaland family. And from there was able to write, and get to the place where, as of most recent, her project that you're probably familiar with was Little Fires Everywhere. And she served as a co-EP on Little Fires Everywhere and wrote an episode, as well as provided a great deal of creative input, which we'll get into in our conversation here. Before we dive in, though, I just want to keep y'all posted. It's been a nice, busy week. Behind the scenes, we've been working on a narrative podcast that I anticipate will drop as episode 20 of the Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon podcast, but it will be a bit of an exclusive because it won't be an interview, it'll be a creative project that was written by myself and Candace Sanchez McFarland, directed by me, and it's a 2020 election podcast exclusive. So I'll leave you with that. We'll dive into this beautiful conversation with writer, producer RAAMLA MOHAMED, and I will catch you after the jump.
Roll sound.
Speed.
The interview. Take one.
Action. So welcoming RAAMLA MOHAMED to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to find out a little more about the milestones in your life. Tell me about Julie Crawford.
Oh, wow. You did your homework. Well, Julie Crawford was my college freshman professor at Columbia, and she taught this class called Literature Humanities, which they called Lit-Hum. And
I'm glad
it was
you cleared that up because I didn't know what that meant when I came across it.
They call it's short for Lit-Hum. And at Columbia, everyone has to take what they call the core curriculum, which are a bunch of specific classes like art history and music history. And it's kind of great because every freshman is kind of taking the same classes, but everyone has different teachers. So they divide the classes into like small classes of, 18 to 20 students. And Julie Crawford was my professor. And, I had gone to a predominantly white school in high school and even junior high. And so Julie kind of introduced us to not only just the classics of Aristotle, Plato, these mandatory works, but then we were able to read, Toni Morrison, Frantz Fanon, and she really got me into kind of critical thinking and also literature in a way that I actually was an economics major and changed my major to English freshman year because I was so into literature at the time.
Did you read the Poetics?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's kind of a requirement for writers to read. I don't even think I read it in college. I think I read it after college. I feel like some writer told me, you should read Aristotle's Poetics.
Right. Are there things, because as a director, there's like all these films that I imagine it's changed now as people enter the industry in different ways. But are there like a bunch, like a canon or like a handful of books that you're expected to have read, whether it's a textbook or a novel as a writer?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think I know, Robert McKee's Story is a book that, that writers read. I actually like Save the Cat, those books. Those are good. I prefer, actually, there's a Save the Cat Goes to the Movies, which actually takes the elements and theories of Save the Cat, but then applies it to movies you're familiar with. So you're like, oh, okay, this is that, Dark Night of the Soul moment in this movie. And then it talks about like different genres and how the kind of breaking down that applies to different genres. So I find that book helpful.
Right.
But, I mean, besides those books and other textbooks, I'm trying to think of, Sidney Lumet's Making Movies.
Making Movies, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book. I mean, even I just think it's a fascinating and interesting just to hear his career and kind of experience as a filmmaker, even though I'm, I think of myself as purely a writer, not like a writer-director, but I feel like that's a really good book. And I think those are the books that when I think of that have helped me in my career.
Yeah, they're very helpful in demystifying the process. And people laugh at Save the Cat, but I feel like that was the book that mentioned as an example, Sea of Love with Al Pacino, and how there's the moment where he's like going to capture, they set up a sting operation and they're trying to capture these criminals, and they have a Yankee autograph signing thing. And the guy comes with his kid, and he knows Pacino's a cop. He sees that this is a setup, and Pacino doesn't arrest him there because he's with his son. And then I think he looks at him and says, "I'll catch you later." And because of that, you're like, okay, he's a good guy. Right. And the saving of the cat.
Those the defining scene, what they call defining scenes, or, those scenes that define who a character is and tells you a lot about a character, are very important, but also sometimes difficult when you're crafting the story yourself.
Right. Yeah, and I think too, to what you said about you fancy yourself a writer. I feel like the best scripts, and I'm sure yours fall in this category, they are written with underlying direction, right? Like even like if you say the apple falls off the desk, you're telling me close up. You know what I mean? And so there's like a nice nuanced way of communicating that, which then gets passed to us, and then we kind of try and delicately pass it on to the cinematographer. So it's a nice dance. So that was at Columbia, Julie Crawford, and Lit Hum.
Lit Hum.
But you grew up in LA. And
I'm from LA, yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I mean, I grew up in LA, like, during the height of East Coast, West Coast, beef and the LA riots and OJ. So, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, all those times were times where basically LA was kind of getting put on the map, in some ways. And I grew up in the, off of Slauson and La Brea. So I really am like from LA.
Yeah.
And I grew up in an area called Windsor Hills, which is a predominantly Black area. But then I went to high school and junior high in Brentwood. So, and I went there during the OJ trial, essentially.
Wow.
So it was a very interesting experience. I actually didn't even know where Brentwood was when my mom told me we were going to go look at a school called Brentwood. I was like, where is that? She was like, in Brentwood. I was like, well, that's not really helpful. But then the OJ thing happened. And of course, everyone knew where Brentwood was. But it was interesting because I feel like even though, obviously people think of LA as like Hollywood and all this stuff. I mean, I basically did what I think most teenagers did, which was go to the movies, go to the mall, hang out with my friends. LA is a pretty suburban place. My mom was a court reporter. My friends' parents were either like, doctors, teachers. Occasionally there'd be some celebrity sighting or something. But I really did not feel, getting into the industry, as I call it, I didn't feel like I had any kind of leg up or anything just being from here. I felt like probably most transplants feel, I had to work my way up as an assistant and make my own connections because I really didn't know a lot of people.
Did you feel I don't think disconnect is the word. Let me rephrase a question that I've not phrased yet. But did you kind of did you not imagine entertainment as a career? Or did you?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I actually, I think the kids now growing up are so lucky because the internet and, has more access to understanding what a writer does, a director, a showrunner. There's more people who look like us, even though we have, some ways to go. There are at least some examples. So I didn't know, what a TV writer was. I remember once I was on the plane and I sat next to this guy who worked on King of Queens, and he said he was a writer. And I was like, I was putting it together like, oh, right, I guess someone has to write what they say. But, I think when I was in college and I was thinking about film and TV, or I guess I thought I'd either be like some kind of film critic. I'd be, on one of those VH1 shows, talking about, what Spike Lee was thinking and Do the Right Thing or whatever.
Right.
But that was really kind of, I guess, critical studies or media studies was what I was interested in because I just figured I could go to school for that. I didn't know how to become a writer. So
right.
Yeah, I didn't think about it until I ended up going to grad school at, USC for TV and film. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can do this.
Do you recall the moment or like the first story that had an impact on you?
Yes, I remember. So the summer before my senior year of high school, I took this film class at Oxford in England. And I was there for a month and we watched Do the Right Thing. And I had seen Do the Right Thing. I think my mom didn't really want me to see it when I was younger because, there's some sexual stuff in it. But
right.
I finally watched it, at age appropriate. And I don't know, we were talking about it in class and I just got every part of it. I just understood it. And it was the first time I realized like, oh, like I really understand the story and what it's trying to say and its impact.
Yeah, we're going to have to get Spike on here because I've mentioned that film. Seath Mann was on, mentioned it. Anybody really Black of a certain age, that was the entry point. That was the like North Star. That was the kind of, injection into your bloodstream of like, oh, people do this,
right.
And maybe I can, which is crazy because it's such a fucking crazy idea to just say, I'm going to go be a director. But like,
right.
all you need is that one thing, You know, like
Yeah.
it's like the first time you see anything, you're like, oh, well, they did it. Perhaps I can do it, which is why we need more people in positions of power and creative authority, you know?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, I think there was just, and I think also in that time, there just was something about, just, it was artful. It wasn't just, a movie that, with Black people in it. It just, you could tell just the way it was shot, the way it was different, it
Right.
was, so I think that's also part of why it spoke to me. And I think a lot of us.
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting time overall too, because you mentioned the type of hip hop that was happening in LA, and it seemed like the art that was coming out of the Black community was, and I hate to sound elitist, but it was art, and it was like, you could have a Tribe Called Quest, you could have the X Clan, you could have Public Enemy, you could have LL Cool J, you could have NWA, you could have all these like different entry points into the mind of the Black male, because at that point it was male dominated even more than it is now.
Right.
But then it kind of became about partying and other things, and I often wonder who's behind those pivots.
Right.
Is it the artist, or is it the people signing the artist and changing the message that gets out there?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I also wonder, just in general in art, you think about how, there are times of darkness. And I think in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, there was so much, Black trauma from, crack cocaine and poverty and recession and all these things. Increase in, incarceration,
Right.
all these things that were happening. And I just always wonder, like by the mid 90s, when, Black people were becoming, more entrepreneurs, more successful, that maybe there was just a response in the music and the art to just have this lightness and more fun,
Right.
Just because the trauma was so real and so, lasting, I guess
Right.
you could say. And then I think things shift again, things turn, as you see, now, where, the trauma is, the trauma's always been there, obviously, but it's interesting to see like what that relationship with, art and our, personal struggles, how that ends
Right.
up, on screen or in music.
Is that what when you sit down and write, like who do you write for?
I mean, I write for Black women mostly, because I'm a Black woman, and and that is who I want to watch my shows, not just only, but kind of, that's what I love about like Insecure. It's a show that I really do feel that is for a Black woman, but also is specific and interesting enough that it invites
Right.
kind of everyone in some ways.
Right. I mean, the smaller you go, I feel the more universal it is. It's like it's kind of counterintuitive, but there's, I think of movies like, do you ever see like Water for Chocolate?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, you can't go more macro than that. Right. But like,
Right.
I can watch that and say, oh, like I'm here with you. Like it's real, it's
Right.
human, and it's just, there's a universality, but the things that are different are what we listen to, what we eat, you know what I mean? Like the shit we experience is kind of, nobody's going through something that other people have never seen.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I always, I think of, I also try to really get into my characters' heads when I'm writing and think about what is their logic and where are they coming from? Where's their pain? What is their backstory? Because I think it informs so much just about people in general.
Right.
more than even sometimes people themselves realize, but I also think it creates empathy, because I never want to be like, oh, well, that character's crazy, or that character's a villain or evil, because that's not how people are. People operate in contradictions and
Right.
complexities. And I think when you put that on screen, it feels more real and people can relate, because, in one instance, someone can be kind, and in the other instance, someone can be cutting.
Right.
And so I think that when people see themselves on screen, whether it's, race or class or, sexuality, whatever it is, or even just behavior,
Right.
I think people can connect more to, what you're trying to do.
Right. Right. Nice. Let's hop back to the Columbia days, and but like kind of like pivot out, because you caught the English bug. You didn't catch the bug, but like you changed your major,
Right.
and
Yes.
then you graduate and you work for a theater company in New York. What
yes.
are you doing at that point? Like, what's your target? Are you thinking, I'm going to be a writer? Or are you like, just let me figure out post college life? Like, where were you?
Well, so I declared English freshman year, but then junior year I added film studies. So I became a double major, and even though my, the counselor told me I was never going to finish the film studies major, but I did. And so I ended up working in theater. Honestly, my first job out of college was at Washington Mutual Home Loans. I was as a receptionist in Harlem, okay? and the office was on 125th Street, and my desk was at the window, okay?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting. I probably could make a show just about that, but I mean, sadly, my last name is Mohammed, and I graduated in 2003, and I was in New York, and I even though I had experience working, I couldn't really find a job. So because of a lot of the anti kind of Muslim, backlash, what happened with September 11th. So I worked at Washington Mutual Home Loans, and then I ended up being and getting this theater job at this theater called 59E59 Theaters that was just starting up, and they had 3 spaces, and the executive producer needed an assistant. So I took that job, and it was actually great because, it was a hard job, but that's kind of what got me into writing, because I had to see all the shows, and I got really into just the theater experience, like being there and meeting some of the playwrights. And, there's something very, I don't know, and I still feel this way. There's something like very visceral about being in a theater and being with the actors and in their emotions.
Right.
And the words are really the thing that is the most important part of that. And so it was really after working there, I decided to apply to grad school, and I applied to UCLA as well because they had like a theater program, but then I ultimately decided to go to USC and try to do TV and film. But that's really when I was like, oh, I think writing, like I think maybe I want to get into writing.
Right. What was was there an eye-opening experience when you got into the MFA program? Because like I often laugh about in undergrad, because I didn't go to the higher levels of education.
You say you saved a lot of money, I guess.
Right. I remember the first. Oh man, I don't even remember the class, but we were, let's say we had a Monday class, and then Wednesday we met again or whatever it was. And I was like, oh, we were supposed to read the whole book? Like I read like 3 chapters. I thought I was doing something there. Like, no, you're supposed to have read the entire book. Is there any like thing that kind of surprised you in the graduate level screenwriting and TV writing pursuit?
Yeah, what surprised me is that we didn't just take writing classes. Like we had to take an acting class, we had to take an editing class, production. And I was like, what, And I remember I had this acting teacher, Nina Foch, who's no longer with us, but she was this older woman. She'd been an actress and teaching for so long. And she looked like she was kind of like frail and very sweet. But she, I mean, if you showed up and you didn't know what was what, I mean, she had no problem telling you. And she would
Right.
say it in such a sweet face. So I literally, I mean, before every class, I felt like physically ill because I was scared of what, she may say to you. And even if she liked something, she might go, good, good. Like that was kind of the, the most you would get. But I also learned a lot because we had to learn about, intentions, and it did help me in the writing to think like an actor. But yes, that was when I was in that class, and that was the first semester. I thought, I have made a giant mistake. I don't know why they accepted me into this program. I am a fraud. It's not going to work out. So yeah, no, I hear you on. You're like someone like switched names accidentally or something. I don't know what this is about.
the bizarro version of me has arrived. What is that a 2-year program or 3-year? How long does it run?
2 years, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you graduate with like a script, and then like the industry just like hires you up and you get right to work?
Yeah, absolutely. All that happened, clearly. No, I graduated, didn't find an entertainment job for a year. I had worked at Fox Searchlight when I was in grad school as an intern, but unfortunately they only had intern positions, so I wasn't able to stay on, even though I really did like working there. So yeah, it was really a whole year. I kind of just took odd jobs. I babysat. I wish Uber had been around because I definitely would have Ubered. And yeah, so I just was kind of struggling until I had a friend who I went to grad school with who heard about an opening as a writer's PA on Grey's Anatomy. And so I applied for that and interviewed and thankfully got that job. So that was my first, job in TV.
Right. And so what did you do as a writer's assistant? I actually want to kind of get into that a little bit as well. Like from my understanding, it seems like there's a very clear progression through credits and levels for writers as dictated by the Guild. How does that move? Like you go from writer's assistant to what, and how do you end up like Shonda Rhimes if you go through every step?
Right. Well, I start off as a writer's PA. So the writer's PA gets the lunch and coffee and, for the writers, and makes copies of scripts and stuff like that. And then the next level above that is writer's assistant. And the writer's assistant is actually in the room taking notes as the writers talk. And, at times they might get a script, a freelance script, which is a, great opportunity. And then after writer's assistant, usually if you get a script and you do pretty well, you'll get promoted to staff writer. And then,
so by that you mean they'll say, here, this episode of Grey's Anatomy is yours, RAAMLA, and go write it from an outline.
You'll be in the room. They'll help you break it. They know you're, kind of a baby writer, as they call you. And then you go off and, write it. And honestly, I think, I think for the most part, even if you get rewritten, because everyone's going to get rewritten, if you just turn in a kind of a solid script as either writer's assistant or a staff writer, then you have a pretty good chance of staying on. Just because the expectation is the showrunner really just wants, a script that they can work with, versus kind of have to re-break or page one rewrite, even if they end up changing every word of dialogue, but at least the spirit of what you wrote is there, then that's considered a pretty good look. So, so I think, so staff writer, and then story editor, and then executive story editor, and then co-producer, then producer, then supervising producer, then co-executive producer, and then executive producer. Those are the steps.
Now, are there really big fundamental differences in what you're doing with each of those elevations in title?
No, yeah, you're still a writer. It's just, it's really about the expectations. So the expectations of that the showrunner has of a staff writer are much different than their co-executive producer. The co-executive producer is expected to pretty much have a pretty strong voice in the room. Sometimes, lead room discussions, probably, be copied on emails or handle situations that may come up that the showrunner can't do. So those are the main differences. And then, if you're in the middle, then you may be covering set, at times. And again, maybe writing a little more, maybe get a couple more episodes. It really depends on the showrunner. I've been in rooms where some showrunners don't really care about what level anyone is. They just want everyone to contribute. And then I've been in other rooms where it really does kind of matter. But also, you get paid more for every step. So, like anything, the more they pay you, the more they expect you, to come through, basically. So.
And once you achieve a particular level, that's your level. Or you can't like be like a supervising producer and then fall to like a staff writer on the next show. Or can you?
No, yeah, I think that's pretty rare. Unless, there are people who end up being like co-producers or producers who may be on the production side a little bit, or and then if they want to start over and be writers, they may have to start at staff writer or story editor. Right. But no, once you're at that level, you pretty much stay at that level. One thing I'm hoping changes that, just in kind of these companies' commitment to diversity is that, kind of Black and brown writers don't have to repeat staff writer as much when they change shows, because a lot of times what they call diversity hires or diverse staff writers, the studio will pay for them. So sometimes the show will only want, a Black or brown writer if they're free. And they, instead of getting them as a story editor or, executive story editor. So, and it's really problematic because you can be on 4 different shows. Let's say they're 1-season shows and you're still a story editor, a staff writer, even though you've done, I don't know, like 50 episodes of television or something.
Right. Which is ridiculous.
That's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So that's the only part that in the promotion, that story editor bump is very important so that you can kind of keep going.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that was an education for me and hopefully the audience. I've just always been interested in seeing, in learning more of the dynamics of how that operates. And so to continue from where we were, you were a writer's assistant on Grey's.
I was a writer's PA.
Writer's PA. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you submitted for the Disney ABC Fellowship?
Well, so I was a writer's PA on Grey's, and then Jenna Bans had a show called Off the Map, which Shonda was producing. So she needed an assistant. So I became her assistant on the pilot for Off the Map. And then when Off the Map became a show, I became the medical researcher on Off the Map. And then Off the Map got canceled, but then Scandal got picked up, and Shonda asked me to fact check the Scandal pilot. So I did the fact check the Scandal pilot, and then I became the researcher on Scandal when it was a show. But it only had 7 episodes, which, now is like, oh, like a cute little limited series. But at the time, I was like, what? I was like, I need to pay my rent. Like, what's going to happen?
Right.
So I applied for the Disney program because, the timing would work out. We'd be done with production in October. And if I got in, it would start, in January. So I figured I could eat, chips and cheese for a couple months until hopefully I got into the program.
So I did the Disney ABC program as well for directors. And for us, it was a 2-year thing that I'm trying to remember because I did so many programs, but I feel like we only got paid while we were shadowing on a show.
Oh,
so,
I see.
Like and there was no guarantee that you even would for your duration of the program. It was really a matter of did the showrunners respond to your materials? And so I shadowed Grey's and Blackish. But for the writers, were you guaranteed something over that term?
Yeah. So our program was a year, and we were paid like, the whole year.
Nice.
I think I've told this story, but the Friday, we got paid on a Saturday, like the first week of the program, and the Friday before I had $6 in my bank account, and I was like, well, good thing this worked out.
Right.
So yeah, we got paid, and then what happened once you got on a show? The only downside to that is once you get on a show, you're not paid as a staff writer, salary. You're paid, through the Disney program. So, it's, again, I was happy to be in the program and given the opportunity to, be able to come back to Scandal as a writer. But at the same time, the Disney salary is about, I don't know, a third of the staff writer, if you were just a staff writer salary.
Right.
So, obviously it worked out, but I guess that's kind of the trade-off.
Right.
A little bit. So
from there, researcher from one show to the next, and then how did you transition to being a writer on Scandal?
So I left. We were done with production. I got into the Disney program. I did the Disney program, and then I actually came back. I went to Grey's Anatomy for a few months while I was in the program, and even though it's hard to believe, Scandal was kind of an on the bubble show. So we didn't know if we were going to come back for season 2. And so if we hadn't come back, I would have stayed on Grey's Anatomy as a writer. But the show came back. And so then I went to Scandal as a writer, and I got to write episode 5 of season 2. And we only had 13 episodes at that time. We hadn't gotten the back 9. So I was kind of like, well, I'll have a credit. I'll get health insurance. I can join the guild. I that was pretty much what it was. And then Oprah tweeted about it, and then the show was like a giant hit. So
and there you have it.
And there you have it. Yeah.
Isn't it so amazing though? And it's important to remember and appreciate those moments when you're like, man, I just gotta get one episode.
Yeah.
And then like when the things start to turn, it becomes imperative, or it's impressed upon you to maintain that same like I don't even know the adjective. It's not like
hustle and excitement.
Hustle and because now like I'm sure for you, like you have a lot of things on the burner that we'll talk about, but like there's even for me, there's a point where you're like, oh, these 2 shows want you to do a couple episodes. Oh, cool, thanks. And
right.
And before you were like, will they even meet with me? So
right. No, yes, for sure. Honestly though, I do try to remember that and that feeling and that hustle in order to just keep me going, just because I know that it's easy to become like complacent. And, even when I was on Scandal for, many years, you're like, oh, the show's coming back. It's coming back. And, I remember what happened with 2.5 Men, and I think about this idea where people on this hit show and they're like, I'm good. I don't have to think about anything else,
Right.
And then the show, Charlie Sheen, goes crazy, and then they cancel the rest of the season of a like 24 episode show. That's a lot. That's very devastating. So again, we're not in control of what could happen, and so all I do, I try to make sure that I kind of throw a lot into the fire because you just never know what's going to happen. Things that seem like sure things, didn't pan out the way that I thought, and things that I kind of was like, oh, maybe. And then that's the one that, has hit. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm thinking about choosing things and what I'm working on.
Right. And when you talk about, you were mentioning the unique kind of culture of every room based off of the showrunner. And you wrote the big Scandal How to Get Away with Murder crossover episode that everybody was waiting for. How did that end up in that particular case, how did that end up in your hands? Is it like luck of the draw, or is it like RAAMLA best handles these themes? Like what, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I had our showrunner at the time was Mark Fish, and in season 7, and I went to him in the beginning of the season, and I said, I'd like, I'd like that my episodes, since this is the last season of the show, I'd really like if my episodes were directed by Black directors. So that was kind of what I wanted. And he was like, okay. So the first episode of that season was going to be, I think, some other episode. But anyway, then he came to me and said, so I know that you said you wanted, to have a Black director, but, we want you to write the, crossover episode for How to Get Away with Murder and Scandal. And he was like, it's not going to be a Black director, but, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Right.
I was like,
that's okay. That's fine.
I was like, that's real Black. So, I approve that. So it was very exciting. And, Tony Goldwyn actually directed it. And I will give him credit. We had like Black hair meetings because there was a Black hair salon scene, and he really wanted to understand. I was pretty specific about what each woman's hair was going to be, and, he sat in the meetings and he wanted to understand like how a weave is, what the wig is, and all this stuff.
Right.
So it was really exciting because I was a fan of both shows. So it was,
right.
It was fun to kind of see how these two women were going to, we're going to interact. So, so that's how that kind of came about.
This is Barry Alexander Brown, and you're listening to Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon.
How to Succeed as a Creative Professional is Pete Chatmon's upcoming book about his journey as a director. What started in 1993 has been a marathon full of persistence and creative pivots, transitioning from indie filmmaker to teaching at NYU's acclaimed film school, to running a production company, to directing television and commercials, and ultimately eyeing a return to the feature films that gave him his start. A mixture of how-to, self-help, and inspiration, this book will be for any person eyeing a successful career in a creative art. How to Succeed as a Creative Professional is coming soon.
So I have a question that lies underneath all of these milestones. Okay. And just being in the room does not mean you move up the ladder, right? Mm-hmm. And no disrespect, but like you could probably look at the people that were in the program with you, and I would assume that not all of them have had the same level of success as you've had. What could you share about navigating those rooms that's important for people to understand so you can continue to build a career?
Wow, that's a good question. I think for me, I think you really have to know yourself and know what your strengths are. I was a fan of Scandal. Like I really love the show. And so for me, I kind of approached it as a fan and also a student because, I was like, okay, the qualities that I'm good at are, being a dork and also like being a fan. So I was like, I'm a student, I like to study things and watch things and read things. So I would read the scripts. I look at the changes, especially when I was a baby writer, look at the changes that either Shonda or, our showrunner or whatever would make and try to see what was changed and why. When I was on set, I would talk to the directors and ask them about, their choices, not questioning them, but just really trying to understand and learn, learning what the line, like the difference between why you cross the line here, why you don't cross the line. Right. And that actually helped me in writing to understand like how something's shot. And when you write something a certain way, what someone like you, like as a director, what that tells you, what are the, how you interpret that. And I also, I'd watch the cuts and I'd see what shots were chosen, so that once I went on set, I could be like, oh, well, I noticed we stay pretty far wide until, later, or I can, I think Shonda looks like she likes kind of, one take things if you can, work it out. So then at least I was informed, and I would be like, oh, well, like, oh, you want to get this coverage? We'll never use a shot because every time I watch the cuts, they just keep getting cut out.
Right.
So just stuff like that. And also, rewatching episodes so that I could be in the room and I could say, well, this is kind of similar to what we did in episode 307 or whatever. Or, I'd read and watch the news and be like, oh, I read this article about this. So all of that's what I could contribute until I felt comfortable pitching in the room. Cause it was really a struggle for me, really the first couple of years pitching in the room. I was in my head a lot. I might come up with an idea, but I didn't really pitch it right,
Right.
And then someone else would pitch it and I'd be like, I just pitched that. But, it's like, I didn't say it in a way that was appealing,
Right.
So I worked on what my strengths were, and those are my strengths.
Right.
And also working really hard. We had these things called addendums that are basically what plays underneath, like when people are in a scene, like the news or the TV is on.
Okay.
So, someone has to write that. And I'm sure you've probably shot stuff like that, like the reporters or whatever it is. And no one wants to write that because it doesn't get heard and, is annoying. But I would write them. I wrote sometimes pages. Sometimes we needed like a monologue underneath and I'd be like, I'll just write it. And it also, was a way that my boss could see my writing in kind of a non sequitur way. So that was early on how I kind of, approached it. And then a lot of it is just time happens. I'm sure that happens. Same with the directing. Just things become more second nature. So pitching became more second nature and writing became more second nature. And I just had to give myself the time.
But I love that. I love the like in any room, right? And because I feel the same, right? That's why I'm asking. Like, I feel like the same. Like, I go from show to show, right? And and there's this interesting thing where I'm like director, but like, every show is different, and sometimes they're like, "Yo, how we shooting it?" And then on other times they're like, "I don't want to do that," And so like you're doing that dance, but it sounds like. As I'm like listening to the journey, it sounds like the teacher you mentioned at USC with the acting class was doing that to get people to begin to know themselves. You know what I mean? And because once you know yourself, you can come in there and be confident about what you say. And it also sounds like you were a resource that made people's lives easier.
Yeah. No, and that's what I tell people. I'm like, that's what the showrunner wants. They have a lot of responsibilities, and a lot of things to think about. So they want people who are going to make their lives easier. Even if it's a small task, to just take that on or handle something on set. You never know. Difference.
I did one show because I like every cut I try something different. And I was like, I'm gonna try and get really close to time, just because I don't care. Why not? Let's see. And the showrunner was like, "Oh, thank you. This is the least amount of editing I've ever had to do on an episode." And she was getting married. That made her day. Like that was like she had other things that she could devote her time to. And like, even though that's got nothing to do with the job, technically, it's got everything to do with the job because, we all just want to be able to exhale.
Right. Exactly. And she's now remembers you as someone who made her life easier.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm assuming you made Kerry's life easier, and that would be Kerry Washington.
Yeah.
And
I hope so.
If we can hop out on a limb, how did you guys build, or how did you move to the next projects? Because I know you've got Reasonable Doubt right? A legal
Yeah.
drama and development, and then obviously the multiple Emmy nominated Little Fires Everywhere. How did you guys kind of transition to, more of a partnership on those projects?
It's interesting because so Kerry and I mean, we've been working together for a while, but I think during the crossover, she and I, kind of talked a little more about, that storyline and everything. And then oddly enough, there was like a writer dinner, and she pulled me aside. It was like our last kind of writer actor dinner, and she pulled me aside and she's like, "I'm doing this project, Little Fires Everywhere," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, congratulations!" And she's like, "Yeah. Anyway, I want you to be in the room." And I was like, "What?" And I hadn't even, Scandal was ending, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I had this, project with Issa Rae, and I was like, "Okay, I'll do that," and I had another movie that was in development at Universal. So, I was like, okay, good. And,
Did you
so
say,
Kerry's...
I'm a co-EP now?
Well, I was supervising producer then. So I was like, trying to get my way into co-EP land. But, to Kerry's credit, people say a lot of things, obviously, in this business. People talk, say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, whatever. But
right.
she did it. I mean, she connected me with Liz Tigelaar, the showrunner. She, talked to Hulu. She talked to ABC. I mean, she really... And the thing is, I'd never heard this from her. I heard this from other people. She didn't even, she's not even the type of person to be like, I did this for you,
Right.
She just said, this is what, I want you to be in the room. And then I was in the room and she's like, hi. Like she didn't. And, right. But it was so, it was great to, already know her going into the project just because, she's so great, and know that there was someone who was smart and like kind.
Right.
On a project, because you never know what's going to happen.
You never know.
Yeah, exactly. And then I ended up staying on for production, which was great. And
is that not a normal thing? It would do the writer or co-EP duties often end or occasionally end when the scripts are done?
Well, yeah, I think in like cable or streaming, because we write things and they shoot things, unlike Scandal or other shows where you're writing and shooting at the same time.
Right.
But yeah, Liz Tigelaar, the showrunner and creator, she stayed on, and then she kept me and another co-EP on for the shooting, and then the other writers, don't stay on.
Right.
So yeah, so I was happy to be able to stay on and really, be able to kind of be on set for the Mia and Pearl, scenes, and
right,
and
which
also
were great.
Get to. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm an only child, a single mom, and so that storyline was really important to me because I think it's such an interesting, complex relationship.
Right.
And then also, the kind of edges scene that we did, with her, smoothing her edges down. It was great because, Kerry's a hair person, she's this, Black woman who, I was like, she had the pro style and all the specific, I was like, I want to see the brown gel on the toothbrush, and the director, Michael Weaver, I was like, I want to see the edges really again, so it was good because it was, even though it was some people might be like, oh, that's just an eighth of a page, whatever, like quick. I was glad that there was care taking into it because it was something at the moment that was important.
Right. And those that is character, you like you even talk about, you mentioned Insecure, and there was this one moment in the most recent season where, her cousin is at, he's eating like Jamaican food somewhere. And like the whole time on the phone, he's like, and he's wiping his nose. And I'm like, that's real shit.
Right. The hot just making you just drip.
Yeah, just making you drip. I'm like, man, that's real, And even if you don't get it, like there are people for whom that is an affirmation of what you eat, but also who you are. You know what I'm saying? And that's so important to defend that.
Yeah,
because
no,
that gets
it's true.
lost.
It's true. It really is true. Just to have, and Little Fires, showed me that it's important to have not just diversity in the writers' room, but also on set and in post production.
Right.
To someone go, wait a minute, no, that's a moment. Like we need to make sure we have that. So
right,
it makes a difference.
Is there anything from your time as a researcher that you found uniquely positioned you or helped you in taking a book to the screen?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess I haven't really thought about it, but yeah, because you do have to, you take articles or different stories that you read and, you do take the parts that are, kind of most interesting, dramatically. Because there are a lot of things, in the book on Little Fires that we all loved, but, when you're thinking about translating it to screen, it just doesn't work, or it needs to be simplified, or it needs to be expanded because, we have, 8 episodes.
Right.
So I do think, I remember when I was a researcher on Scandal, the writers were talking about kind of breaking the Fitz an intern storyline. And one thing that I found, where Sean had asked, how did the Monica Lewinsky, scandal, how did it break? And when I researched it, you think oh, okay, you're like, oh, some blogger, the blogger, I forgot now what the blog was.
Drudge.
But anyway, Drudge, yeah, you're like, Drudge broke it. You're like, oh, in my head, I was like, oh yeah, I think it was a blogger broke it. But then when I researched and looked, it was like, no, the blogger actually broke the story that Newsweek had killed the story. So it was like this very interesting thing where, kind of highbrow media had, said this isn't really newsworthy. And then kind of what now I guess would be somewhat lowbrow, media that didn't need as much fact checking or was like, no, the story isn't the intern story. The story, I got a story about why did Newsweek kill this story about this intern. So we kind of, use that because that's interesting. Because then it was like Olivia Pope can kill one story, but now we have someone who's like, you can't kill the fact that you killed the story.
It's like whack-a-mole, right? Like it just keeps coming up.
Yeah, exactly. So that was part of dramatically like, oh, that's an interesting turn because you can give Olivia a win, but then have a twist where someone's like, why are you involved in this story? Like just the mere fact that you're involved in this story is a story.
Right.
So anyway, just those kind of moments I think are helpful.
Because it's a bit of a different beast, I'm sure.
Yes.
And just making sure you maintain the integrity of the book, but also maintain the integrity of what an audience is going to need who may not have any allegiance to the book also, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And also, I mean, in the book, Mia's character isn't specified as being Black or a person of color. So obviously once Kerry was cast, the story of Mia working for Elena and, Reese Witherspoon's character is like, what now? We're going to have to address some things, about this, this Black woman and this white woman fighting and the racial elements, things need to kind of change a bit. So, that was a challenge too. I mean, a good challenge. I liked adding that element to the show. I think it really helped.
Right. So we're turning the corner here. I have a couple, I don't know how to classify these questions, but I'm just interested because I'm looking for those who are on the audio version of the podcast. RAAMLA has books in her office, which screams to me writer. But like, what's your ideal environment for writing?
It's interesting. I do like a desktop. I have a desktop here. It's great to be able to like see, really like see the words close up. But honestly, I think I will say the benefit of being on a show that has a bajillion episodes per season and is shooting and writing at the same time. I mean, you could put me in a corner and I could write. Like I used to have to write on set sometimes, and sometimes set was on location and was in a hot room, and I had to, and also the cast, the cast on Scandal was so great, but they also were funny because, they didn't find out the storylines until the table read. So if I was writing the next episode, sometimes I would have to hide because they wanted to know what was going to happen.
Right.
So there were times where I had to write some scenes occasionally, and I'd be like, let me go to, some side room somewhere.
That's awesome.
I'll tell the AD where I am in case someone's looking for me. But yeah, so I was kind of trained to write, anywhere. There was one time I had to write a scene in Shonda's office actually because, she wanted it pretty quickly, and she's like, oh, you could just, and to her, she's like, oh, just like sit here and write it. And I was like, whoa.
And you're like, I am not hitting the keys fast enough. She's going to be like, she can't type. That's like 10 words a minute.
I know. And I was like, oh my God, this is so stressful. But, so yeah, I went through those growing pains. So now it's good. I pretty much can, write anywhere, but I don't think beforehand, when I was a baby, even before I became a writer, when I was an assistant, just trying to write, it was like, okay, let me make sure I eat enough. Let me sit down, and it has to be the right time. Then like an hour passes, and I was like, and I'd be like, I'm just not in the mood, and then I'd be like, not tomorrow. So
I need a new mouse pad.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I'm looking. I'm reading. People fighting on Twitter. For whatever for 15 minutes, and I'm like, I don't even know these people. What am I doing?
Right.
So yeah. So and obviously sometimes it happens. Sometimes I do find myself in shade room comments, for way too long. But writers' procrastination. That's our thing.
It's your responsibility to be in the mix with what's going on.
Exactly. So, but I used to write like this. This is a kind of trick that I did that I feel like really helped when I was starting out. Is I would write for 45 minutes. So like I start at the hour, and I'd write like 11 to 11:45, and then at 11:45 I would give myself like a 15-minute break to like be on the internet and do whatever, and then I'd start again. And so then at least I felt like it was like planned procrastination.
Yeah.
So that was helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I know for me, I do a lot of things that seem like busy work, but they help me digest all the writing you've done, right? So like I do like a whole bunch of administrative stuff in prep that is really just designed for me to like get the ABCDE storylines and like, mark this up and make this other document to keep track of this. And let me take the floor plans and put them in my program. And it seems like nothing, but with each exercise, I'm like getting deeper into the script. So then by the time it's time to like plot and block and think of coverage, I'm not sitting there like, how will I shoot this? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm a fan too I like background noise. Like I like the TV being on. Kelly is often like, how do you work with the TV on? I'm like, I actually, it's like company that is there, and I'll look up if anything interesting comes up. But if people are talking like too close to me, like that fucks me up. And I can't not listen to them, which is, it's weird.
No, I totally get that. I couldn't, if people are talking, that's difficult. Or even, I can't do like the TV, but I have like, I'll put on sometimes like a YouTube playlist while I'm writing or whatever. And so that's sometimes helpful just to have like, usually like the energy of whatever I'm working on. Like, I'm working on this project Reasonable Doubt, which, one of my favorite albums.
Jay-Z.
Jay-Z, yeah.
1996.
So I remember when that album hit, and I remember hearing, like Feeling It and Can I Live, and just being like, what is this? And I was a pretty West Coast person, I pretty much, probably should have like a West Side hand tattooed on the back. But, I was like, you can't mess with Cali. I was like, Cali's the best. But, Jay-Z, Biggie, and when I heard Jay-Z on Biggie's album and then, later on Reasonable Doubt, it really was just a different vibe. And I've been a Jay-Z fan, since then, and a Beyonce. I'm wearing a shirt with a bunch of Beyonce.
There you go. But you know what? To your point, he was writing. Mm-hmm. Like the song that did it for me on that album was Regrets, where he's like talking to him and like that's crazy, and then like the little pivot, which is often the way like you can break an idea. It's like, I'm going to rap about all this stuff that these people are rapping about, and most of whom are lying about, but I'm going to come at it from this little pivot where I have remorse about it.
Right. It was like, it was like emo a little bit, like pre-emo.
Exactly. Pre-emo. And,
pre-emo.
But then it makes what you're hearing different because there's a different connection to the crack you sold.
Right. Exactly. And
you know what I'm saying?
And the jazzy kind of samples.
Yeah.
And it just had a different flow. It was like, anyway, so I, like that show, I'll put on like some Outkast or kind of like 90s, Goody Mob, or even like Little Brother, Foreign Exchange. Like I kind of, I'll put on like a kind of jazzier, hip hop, kind of flow. So.
Right.
So and then like when I was writing on Still Star-Crossed, I put on the Game of Thrones soundtrack because it's very like it was like a period and kind of. So sometimes music sometimes helps. It depends on what stage of it I'm in. If I'm still trying to break the story or outline, I can't really do it. But once I'm in the writing and I know what the scene is, then I feel like I'm like playing an instrument, like I'm in a flow.
Right. When you run your own room. Which is coming soon, I am sure.
I hope so.
How are you going to do it? What's going to be different? What'll be like? If you could give me 3 principles on how you're going to run your room, what would those 3 principles be?
Number 1 is, I don't know. That's so good. Honestly, is to just allow everyone to feel comfortable voicing their opinion. I feel like now that I've been in rooms, I'm attuned to like when a lower level writer kind of wants to say something or, is uncertain, and giving lower level writers room to kind of feel confident to pitch. And even like if the pitch, isn't great, but giving them confidence to be like, oh, well, this is, this is a good part of this. And, to encourage them to keep kind of going and falling on a pitch is totally okay. And just to keep doing that. And it's fine. That's how you learn. I also think that, diversity is very important to me in a room. Just so diverse where it's just normalized, where there's not like, the token Black person or the token, whatever. It's that I do appreciate this idea where, the Black person doesn't have to speak for all the Black people, or the Latino person doesn't have to speak for all the Latino. Like when you have the diversity, people can really just be free to be creative without having the burden of, oh, I got to make sure that this character don't do this or blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then I guess the other thing would be lunch, making sure that lunch is all paid for and there's a lot of snacks and people, drinks and healthy. Because honestly, there's nothing worse than, not like lunch being a letdown. If you're a writer, it really, you're just like, ugh. Or, I've been in rooms where, every day is not necessarily paid for, so. Yeah, right. So those kind of fighting for lunch, Pete,
No, look. When I went to Din Tai Fung on a Silicon Valley location scout, I was like, this gonna be all right. This gonna work
right, out. Right. You're like, okay.
Matter of fact, let me get that 50-foot crane since we're here.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I feel taken care of. But yeah, and also just I don't believe in working late, in a room. I mean, obviously if you have to for some reason, but I do think, when you give people lives, they have a life to live, and then they come back and they give that life back to you. So
And I'll ask because you identified your kind of kinship with the audience. Any advice you would give to young writers of color looking to break into this industry, whether film, TV, just entertainment at all, as a wizard of words?
A wizard of words, I like that. I mean, my advice would be to create your own stuff if you can. If I had that, opportunity when I was coming up to either create, like a web series or film my own thing or write my own thing, I definitely would have done it. It just was more difficult and required more, and, figure out what, best suits you. If you're a writer, but you're not someone who wants to necessarily be like, a writer actor or, Issa Rae or Lena or whatever, Lena Waithe, but then that's fine. But find other creative people who can do your work. Apply to the programs. I still think that's, a good look. There are a lot of writing programs that will give you opportunities. And also, it was helpful for me to be in a writer's group with my friends because it held me accountable. A lot of this, when I think about the people who were in my MFA class who became writers, it is not about talent. It was about who stayed here in LA. Everyone who moved away or, decided to take a break or go into another career for a little bit, they didn't become writers. The people who were assistants or just kept writing scripts and working, all of them became writers. So a lot of it is just, time and hustle come together and, something happens. And, this is such a great time because there's not that many of us. So once you get that one thing popping, even as it just starts going. And then at one point, like you said, you're wishing you can get on a show, and then a year or two later, you're having to turn down stuff because you're too busy. So it can be a blessing, but the blessing only really comes if you're dedicated to the hustle. That's how I feel.
And then what can these good people be on the lookout for from you?
For me? Well, let's see. I have a few things in development. That don't mean it's going to be anywhere, but we got our fingers crossed. I have the Reasonable Doubt, the TV pilot that I'm working on with Larry Wilmore and Kerry Washington. And I also have a movie in development at Universal with actually your friend, Ryan Richmond, that I'm working on, a romantic comedy with Malcolm Lee's company. And then I have a project with Tiffany Haddish, kind of comedy that I'm working on. So yeah. And then I also we have Issa and I are developing our Windsor Hills show. So, hopefully that'll see the light of day one day soon. So yeah, I'm just, like I said, you never know what's going to happen. So we just keep working.
And it's full circle, people. Ryan Richmond that Raamla mentioned shot my advanced production film at NYU, my thesis film.
That's right. Yeah. That's so funny.
One of the stars of that film was Kerry Washington. So
that's right.
look at how it all, 21 years later, here we are. Just
exactly.
Overnight.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you go, we really are like 12% of the population.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
There's not that many of us. But, the talent rises to the top. I do believe that. And so we all end up, working together again. And I hope one day to work with you because I think you're very talented.
Likewise. I'm going to just, I'll just keep popping up over your shoulder,
That's totally fine. That's totally fine. But yeah, well, actually, I had a question for you because you said I could ask you a question.
Yes.
My question is, as a TV director, like what do you think when you get scripts, right? are the kind of either pitfalls or things that writers do that either annoy you or, make your job a little more difficult?
Wow. Okay. That's a good one.
You don't have to name names.
So what are the things? So there's a thing that happens sometimes. And I have to parse out this response, and with the caveat that it's different from broadcast to cable streaming. Mm-hmm. One thing that I would say, I have an answer. I think the thing that happens a lot, it happens more in broadcast, which is the page count means more than anything sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so what happens, and I can tell when you've shrunk the font a little bit, but what happens is the thing that gets extracted will be scene directions. So you might get a 4-page scene with it's just they enter the living room and then 3 to 4 pages of shit happens. And then, I'll do my job and I'll really work to think of 2 or 3 different blocking options for everybody in the scene. So we can find it, but I've also thought about it from a camera perspective. So I don't get pushed into something taking forever to shoot. And most actors who work know how to avoid that. But you do that, and then sometimes you start getting these really specific blocking notes, and it's I would have done that if you wrote that.
Right.
And maybe somewhere along the line, it's, I don't know, it's just little miscommunications about things that are super important and specific, but not on the page. And then it's just I'm here to execute on what you want and what you need. But it does get a little bumpy, I guess. I'm trying to find the right adjective, but it becomes a little bit of a thing, because what happens from my perspective is sometimes I can present this thing and then have buy-in from actors, and then someone comes down and says, we don't want to do that. And I could have done what you wanted from the beginning, and now it's making this moment, particularly maybe your first time on a show, it's kind of pulling away from the idea of me looking like I get to do what I think is right. Right. Yeah, it's undermining it's undermining your authority. Right. In some ways. And so that's a thing, and I get it. But it's kind of I guess it's kind of unavoidable, because you can't necessarily, you don't want to get in the business of asking every scene, is this really what you want? You know what I mean? Right. Yeah, but I think that would be it.
That makes sense.
And sometimes then there can be a really big, it's, you've opened up the psychiatry chair here, I guess. But
you're please help me.
but there's also it's there's remnants of people's own journeys that you have to try and find. I've done a show where I think the showrunner probably had a couple scenes on one show one day in the past where it was overblocked, and their lines probably had to be cut. Right. You know what I mean? And this particular showrunner was really adamant about people not moving, quite honestly, right? And the style of the show was kind of designed to hide that. In the kind of way that it was shot, and the movement of camera, and the amount of pieces of coverage would kind of mask that people were just planted. But there were a couple things that we presented and figured out that were really elegant and kept it moving and kept the actors really engaged, that were not going to challenge the ability to get all the lines in the cut.
I see.
But because of that prior probably experience, it was no, too much movement. And it's we kind of all have to know what the other's doing and identify whether or not like that thing we're each scared of is actually about to be infringed upon, or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really interesting. I actually, I mean, it's interesting that some of these things, I mean, I guess you have tone meetings, right? That some of these things aren't kind of discussed. I guess maybe, I mean, I always, you know, Shonda would have these tone meetings and, you know, they wouldn't go on very long, but what I always admired was that she would, you know, kind of point out basically the 3 or 4 scenes that were very important, you know, and she would, you know, give her kind of specific feelings about, you know, about like why she wanted, you know, these scenes to get special attention. And I think that's helpful because then, you know, some other scenes she might be like, yeah, just you can shoot that in a oneer, or you can like, this isn't, you know, this isn't a big scene. So then, you know, when you think about scheduling or you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to spend 2 hours on this scene that maybe we could just we don't have to cover every angle, you know, just kind of get it and move on so that I can really, you know, spend time with the performances. And that's one thing for me, we're talking about when I have my show, performances are everything to me. Like that is what I care about. I would shoot, you know, I would sacrifice coverage for, you know, just getting a good performance. And what you're talking about things written, I am pretty careful about if I don't have any kind of specific vision for a scene, I will just write, they walk in. And I don't have any expectations. And I don't have any expectations of what happens after that. But if I'm like, to your point, when you said even, you know, full circle in the beginning about the close up of, you know, the apple or whatever it is, it's like, I will write, like, we start here and then we, you know, we pull back and see this because it's like, that is what I see and that's what I want to see. And I do think it's important to be specific because, again, you're not going to always maybe be able to be on set. And, you know, I think it's important to allow each department to really be creative. And the more they feel stifled or scared, you know, about making a mistake because you're so specific, but you're not really specific, you know? That, you know, it's not really helpful. And I think it's like, you have to be specific when this is what you really want. And then if you don't care, really, I mean, if you're kind of open, like, well, I just want the scene to feel like this, then, you know, then let people, give them an opportunity to bring something. And I often feel when you do that, it really, something like interesting happens. Like I've been on set and I'm like, oh, this is so much better than I even, you know, imagined it to be.
That's the beauty of the collaboration, you know, like I had a showrunner say, and this was how I got hired again, you know, he was like, you know, you a couple times you had some ideas that in my mind I was like, no, but I never said no. And then like you'd show me the move on the camera and I'd be like, that's a good idea, you know? And like, but like that environment is like how we have to, that's how we elevate it, you know? Like, it's like you write a really beautiful script that, you know, is a blueprint, you know, and a Bible of sorts, right? You know, with because the Bible's interpreted, right? And then we all come in and it's like, how can each department at least offer an idea on how to enhance it, right? And you might say, well, actually, art department in this scene, like, it's not about enhancing it with art, so like we'll just be in the pocket where we are. But wardrobe, you can enhance the shit out of this if we, you know, and they present something that you didn't think about. You're like, oh, that's awesome, you know, or like camera, this isn't for you. This one's a 2-shot, you know, but like everybody should come and say, how do we enhance it? And then fall back if they don't need to, like, you know, get their all-star game dunk on, you know, and then we end up with something that is really nice at the end. And thought about everything.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, this is my feeling is like, you can have 8-10 10 hours of meetings and all this stuff. And it's always going to be the thing you didn't expect that's going to be a problem. It's going to be something, and you're going to have to pivot and figure it out. You know, it's going to be, you know, someone forgot a folder or whatever, you know, you know, or like the location, something, you know, their construction, they didn't mention it or whatever it is, you know. And so I think if you're, you know, kind of open to seeing how something that could be a creative problem could be, you know, something interesting, then I think it's better overall for everyone. And to me, I'm also like, listen, this is such a beautiful, you know, creative job to be in, and you know, we all like make good money, and we get to do what a lot of people dream of doing. And so at the end of the day, for me, I'm like, there's no reason to make it, you know, horrible or complicated or, you know, at the end of the day, I remember once I had like a wardrobe person crying to me because they had the wrong, you know, costume or something. And I was like, look, no one died. You know what I mean? Like we have to think at some point you have to go like, it's just a TV show. You know, that energy, but also the excitement of it is a TV show. So it's a hard balance, but I do think that sanity is, you know, is important, and obviously now health too with COVID. So, you know, for me, it's still a business, it's still a job. And I think it's important that that's remembered as well, besides creativity.
Well, this has been a masterclass in getting in the mind of a writer. I appreciate you swinging through.
Oh, sure. No, thank you. I was so happy you asked me.
Yeah, no, this is great. I really do just enjoy getting to sit down and actually talk in more detail than you probably ever really get to with folks that you know.
Oh, yeah. You know? Well, I mean, you at Julie Crawford, I was like, what? you dug deep. You did a deep dive. So, yeah, it was great to talk about these things.
Yeah. And I'll be pulling for you guys on whenever Emmy night is. It must be soon with COVID.
Yeah, it's a week from Sunday. It's the 20th, 21st. Yeah.
So by the time this
21st,
airs, I will have done an intro that might be acknowledging some wins.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, that would be awesome. But I mean, I do feel like, I know it's a cliche to say, but I really do feel like it's an honor to be nominated, because there's like 12,000 television shows on TV. So really being nominated is, you know, a big deal. So, and I loved working on the show. I love the show. So I'm happy. I get a certificate, I hear. So I'm good with that. It's anything I can show my mom to legitimize my decisions.
Here's the proof.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, thanks again, RAAMLA. And can't wait to see what you do next.
All right. Thank you so much, Pete.
What's up, people? This is Pete Chatmon. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter via @PeteChatmon. Follow the pod on Facebook on our Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon official page, and hit up our mailbag with questions, suggestions, or hey, donations if you're feeling like it, via Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon @gmail.com. And just in case you need to know how to spell it, that's Pete with the last name Chatmon. All right, that was RAAMLA Mohamed, episode 18 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. Pretty crazy that we have done 18 of these. Coming out of quarantine and COVID, this was a bit of a safe space and a cathartic place to head to have conversations with people that I admire and have worked with, or whose work I love. And so, thank y'all for riding with us on this journey. This is the first episode for which I don't know who our guest will be next week. So I'm going to have to, in the middle of prepping All Rise and editing my second of 2 Mythic Quest episodes. I'm going to have to scramble and get a guest. So stay tuned. I'm going to be as surprised as you when I make the intro for next week. But in the meantime, just want to thank my team, Kelly McCreary, our announcer, Tristan Nash, our producer, Jada George, our assistant producer. Tristan is also our editor, as you know. And I want everybody to stay safe, stay blessed, and spread love. We'll catch you next week.